All right. Welcome back, fellow seekers. It's been a while, 2 weeks, maybe, week and a half. My wife and I had a good trip. Did a little kind of mini road trip through Ontario last week, down near Niagara Falls and Niagara on the Lake, and then over to Crystal Beach. And yeah, we had a good time. So my apologies for not putting up something else. I thought I'd try to put something up today. Um, yeah, and I'm just going to read a little bit because I've made some notes. This is all going to be about the different me's, which is part of the reason why I wanted to start doing this. For years, I've felt like I've lived many different lives and been many different people or versions of that same self. Anyway, we'll get more into that. So since this is all about searching for myself, of course, I need to do a little reflection and tell you very briefly at this point, kind of my history, who these different me's are. Maybe give you a little information about each one as well. So that's why I've written stuff down because I don't want to forget any of the me's. Um, Ties in with something else, I've been talking to people about and thinking about the whole idea of trauma and how trauma shapes us in many ways, makes us who we are later in life, and certainly, yeah, has an effect on us. I've been very lucky, I think. I don't feel like I've had a lot of serious trauma in my life, but I certainly know people who have. Um, and yeah. So, and actually, even though I say that, I was introduced to a very interesting idea lately by I hope I get the. I'm sometimes horrible with pronunciation. Gabor Mate, hope that's right. His argument is that we're all traumatized. We're traumatized by our culture the moment we're born. And how we're traumatized is that everything in our culture teaches us that all of our validation should come from outside of us, right? Everything external. When the reality is, at least the things that I've discovered and continue to discover, is that what's on the inside is most important. But certainly Western culture does not um, talk much about that, right? We do focus a lot on appearance, outside things as being the most important. And if that's true, of course, then we all have to do some work to get back to that point where we understand that what's inside of us is most important, which is kind of why I think I'm doing this, right? Why I've been on the journey I've been on for the last 20 years or so. Some people never go on that journey, don't even begin it. I would say, again, from my experience, the majority of people do not even begin it. Don't even, and maybe, it's not their fault. Maybe they just have never been challenged to think about it. Which again is part of the reason that I'm doing this. Just maybe to get people to think a little bit differently. So, yeah, and part of what I'm doing, of course, is unlearning. I'm unlearning things that I've been taught, that my culture's taught me, that I've thought for a long time were true. Doesn't mean that they don't still affect me, but yeah, I am working at understanding how I've been shaped. Because once you understand that, then I would say it's easier to push back a little, or at least to be aware of it. Excuse me. I do have this weird thing going on. I think it's has to do with allergies. Thought I was getting sick, but doesn't feel like sickness. So yeah, I have a lot of part of why I'm doing this too is don't forget I'm really hoping soon to interview others in my life, friends, family, from different points in my life, and I'm really curious to see how their memories compare to mine. I don't know again if you've ever thought about this, but of course I'm sure I've mentioned it already. A memory is a memory of a memory. As soon as we have that experience of remembering something, it changes and it shifts. And yeah, so we often our memory is a funny thing. So, well, where did it begin? I was born in Wingham, Ontario. That's the first me. Not really a me I remember at all. Yes, the hometown of Alice Munro just passed away last week. She has a sign there. I don't. But I did. I went back and visited a couple of years ago, and I learned that the Alice Munro Library is right across the street from the Salvation Army headquarters where I grew up. And that's why, as you're going to see, I moved a lot when I was young. My parents were in the Salvation Army, and because they treat their church, it's basically organized like an army. You get moved quite regularly. So that was the wing of me. Like I said, not really any memories of it. Then we moved to Niagara Falls. I would say that's a different me. Um, Again, not one that I could remember much of. On our trip that we just went on, we drove by my old house, called my mom, and got our address. Didn't trigger anything. I have no memory of really being there at all. Um, then comes probably the most significant move, and that's when we moved to Regina, Saskatchewan. And my mom tells a funny story that when we arrived there, I popped out of the car and immediately saw some kids on their bikes going down the street, and I was like, "Hey, will you be my friend?" You know. And I guess when I talk about trauma, my wife actually reminded me of this morning. Maybe that's one of the worst things that I've experienced. That I moved a lot. I found it hard, certainly after Regina, and I'll get into that in a second. And maybe that's why I've never really left this area. I mean, we live in Leith now. I joke to people and say, "Oh yeah, I moved from Owen Sound all the way to Leith. It's only 10 minutes away," um, and maybe that's why I'm a little bit afraid of going somewhere else. Although I don't feel that as much anymore. That seems to be passing as well. I can see. I said to my wife the other day, I can see ourselves. I can see us moving at some point. Anyway, so Regina, me right, school K to 4. I did there. Big, important meaningful relationships. Well, again, you think they're meaning them. New friendships, first friendships were developed there. Um, I don't, again, really have much memory other than the friends that I made. I remember a little girl 2 doors down that I became friends with, and then the block over, another boy who I was very good friends with. Most of my memories come from, so again, because my dad was both my parents were in the Salvation Army. They ran the youth camp in the summer out there. It was Beaver Creek Camp near Saskatoon. So most of my memories come from there. I mean, I was very lucky. My memory is I didn't have to really take part in much of the actual camp programming. I could do what I wanted, and I was out and gone most of the days. I would go on these paths over. There was a pheasant farm behind that I would go and visit and sometimes pick eggs at. And so I have quite a few memories there. Again, I'm curious how accurate those memories are. I also remember, of course, because my father didn't have his own church, he was what's called the DYC, the Divisional Youth Commander. We would often go to a different church every week. So I remember going to places like Medicine Hat. Oh no, I'm not going to remember. I'm sure we went to Saskatoon. Um, Little places that I have no memory even of their name, but lots of different places each weekend. So that lasted till grade 4, till about 8 years old, and then we got moved to Halifax. And if I had to say that I remember trauma in my life, that's probably was the most traumatic thing. Right? Again, leaving all those friends that I had made, being pulled up from a place that we loved, and being, going basically halfway across the country. I don't remember again much about Halifax. Other than I didn't get along very well at school. I think I got in 2 fights, or maybe more accurately, I got beat up twice at that point. Um, it was a hard time to move. Now I say that, and full credit to my brother. We've never talked about this, but he went through all that when he was in high school, and I would think that would be a much harder thing to do. When you're young, you're a little more malleable. You can adjust. I'm sure it was harder for him. So we only ended up staying in Halifax for about 2 months, 3 months is my memory. And my parents left the Salvation Army at that point. And because my father grew up in Owen Sound and my grandma lived here, we moved back to Owen Sound. I remember taking the train to Toronto and then getting up here. And yeah, so we had basically a small house in Owen Sound, and there was my grandma, and my aunt was still living there at the time. Not for long though. And then my parents and me and my brother. Me and my brother shared a room for a while. I do remember that. And so when I get to Owen Sound, that's where most of my life takes place from here on. Again, I kind of can see different me's. So um, there's the, sorry, being distracted, but I should have muted this. Um, the grade 4 to 6 me, right? So when we first moved back, um, again, I don't have a lot of memories. I remember being terrified to go to the school. I remember Bob Rourke, who was my principal, who ended up being my neighbor out here, making me feel extra comfortable, taking me on a tour to the school, even taking me into the staff room. That was a big deal at the time. So I adjusted, had some really good teachers, and started making friends. Made one good friend in particular who lived down the street. And again, looking back, I'd love to talk to them as well. It's been a long time. One family in particular who I became friends with their son, but really their daughter as well. And because he was very shy, didn't really like to come to our place. I spent a lot of time at their house. They were only 2 blocks away. And I remember things like being introduced to British comedy, which I had never seen at home. What else? I've only learned recently that they're a Métis family, and they are actively involved in the Métis community. I remember yoga. The mother was into yoga, and that was probably the first time I had heard about it, and meditation. Didn't really think much about it at the time, but yeah, that was really good for me, I think, and they played a big role in who I was at the time. And then, of course, at that time, you went from public school to middle school, grade 7 and 8. I went to Strathcona. Again, I don't know. I mean, I don't have bad memories of it. I was different then. I was much shorter, fatter. My mom liked to call me husky. I think I got bugged. I don't know if I want to use the word bullied or not. We didn't really talk about that all that much, but certainly my weight came into it. Wasn't terribly athletic at the time. Didn't have a lot of confidence. I'm not sure I ever did. I've never, one of the other things I've been thinking about is how I've always felt like, even in all the good close group of friends I had, I always felt like I was an outsider a little bit. I still feel that to this day, that I don't necessarily fit in with everybody else. I've heard of the idea of imposter syndrome that kind of comes into it too, where I don't believe I'm good at things, or or I'm making things up as I go along, which is often how I feel even to this day. So grade 7 and 8, and then the big change came. That was another me. Between grade 8 and grade 9, I grew about 6 inches, and suddenly I was a much bigger guy. I had thinned out. Girls actually paid attention to me, which hadn't happened much up until that point. Um, and I had a grade 9 gym teacher. First first day of class, he called me Andy Fearnall. My first name is Andrew. Always got called by my first name, but not necessarily Andy. And he was the one who got basketball into my head. He was an interesting guy, but he recognized I had big feet. He would measure all our wingspans, right? I had quite long arms, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you could be a good basketball player." So he really encouraged me to play, and I give him full credit, because I'm not sure again if my path would have gone that way without him. And because of that, mainly because of basketball, I made a really strong core group of friends, a couple close neighbors as well. And yeah, it was a good time. We had a good time in high school. I really enjoyed high school. Not necessarily the class part of it, although I did enjoy some classes. I enjoyed any class where I was given opportunity to talk and discuss ideas. And yeah, but I think the 80s was a good time to go to school, actually. Mainly because um, students had freedom. We were given responsibility, and we were trusted. Unfortunately, I won't get too much into school. I'm sure I'll do a whole episode on that one day. But we don't do that anymore. One of the things mainly for two reasons: one, insurance companies, who make things very expensive, and we have this strange mentality in school where, when somebody does something wrong, we take it away from everybody. And I witnessed that as a student, and I witnessed that many times as a teacher. Hope I didn't do it often, although I'm sure I fell into it as well. And of course, that means that kids today are paying the price for things they had no role in. And we were part of that too. We pushed the limits as often as the case. But again, I argue with people that that's what high school should be about, right? That's a place. It's a safe place, relatively safe place for people, for teenagers who are apt to make mistakes, to make those mistakes and to learn from them. But my feeling is now we just don't even give them the chance to make mistakes. Don't trust them. Don't give them responsibility. Okay, we'll leave that for another time. So there's the high school me. Really enjoyed that time. And then there's the university me. Very different experience. Went to Western University in London. It was not, I remember at the time I had a mullet. I often describe people, I would ride my 10-speed bike to school, wearing my football leather jacket with I'm sure my mullet blowing in the wind. And if you knew anything about Western, I'm not sure what it's like today, but at that time it was a very preppy school. People with lots of money, very different haircuts than I had, very different sense of clothing and style than I had. I just, again, didn't really fit in. Um, Ended up living with some of my friends, which is both good and bad. I don't live with regrets. These things led me to where I am today, and I'm quite happy with that. But looking back, I would have been wiser probably to go to a smaller school. I'm not even sure if I should have gone to university. It was just kind of assumed that that's what you did. So, I would start saying I was a little bit lost in there, as I mentioned in another version. That's kind of where I first, I guess, depression kind of came into my head first, that maybe I was, and not saying that those things didn't happen before then, um, but it was the first time where I kind of started being more aware of it. So that's the Western me. That was 4 years. Again, I changed slightly in there, mainly because of who I lived with. First 3 years, I lived with my friends. Last year, I lived with my wife, my now wife, and that was my best year. I had some a better success in my classes. Well, I attended more often, which was the biggest problem. And yeah, I took a film class that I really enjoyed, which kind of led to my media teaching. So I do give full credit to that. Then there's the Scotland me. So I went to Teachers College in Scotland for a year, mainly because that's the only place that would take me. I did not have the best mark coming out of university. Applied all over Canada, didn't get in anywhere, and just kind of, well, a very lucky situation where we were out at a bar one night, and a friend said, um, um, I have an extra application for the school in Scotland they're starting up. You want to apply? And I had a few beers, I'm sure. I was like, sure. So the next day, he put it in my mailbox, filled it out, thinking nothing will come of it, and got not an email at the time, I guess a phone call probably 2 weeks later, saying I was in if I wanted to go. So I ended up going, and it was a really good experience. I did very well in school. I actually graduated with merit, which is not something like me, but I think it was because I felt engaged by something that I was interested in. Up until that point, I often say to people, to me, university was like, okay, you want to learn the guitar, you're going to practice the piano for 4 years, and then finally, once you've got that, you've proven you can do that, we're going to let you start teaching the guitar or learning the guitar. And that's why I think now there are programs, concurrent education programs, where people are doing education stuff, related stuff right from the start. That said, I would also argue that one of the problems with our school system is that we only take people who have had really great success in school, and they don't necessarily always know how to teach students who aren't like them. Again, I'll leave the details of that for another time. So then, of course, I come back after I graduate. And I'm just in general going to say there's the kind of Owen Sound me pre-married, which I was really with my wife anyway, so it's not that all different. And then there's the married me, which again, I become a slightly different person. The father, when I became a father, that certainly, that changed things a lot, and changed not just my relationships, but also what I was like as a teacher, as a friend, all of those things. Whoops, sorry. Um, there's obviously the teacher me, right? Which again changed over time. I started in a really strong staff with a great department, people I really admired. Slowly over time, I saw a lot of those people disappear, retire. Um, and then, of course, our school closed, which was another kind of big moment for me. Probably, in some ways, looking back, that was the beginning of the end for me. And then there's the me now, right? The retired me, the semi-retired me, who's doing this stuff. And so yeah, that's a very quick history of who I am or how I see myself. Each one of those people, like I said, kind of influenced the next, but was also a little bit different. Um, yeah, and so now, like I said, I want to have some conversations. Probably my mother will be the first. Maybe I get to her in the next couple of weeks and talk to her about how she saw me as a child. Again, I have some funny stories in my head that maybe I'll either share then or after, but not a lot of stuff. I want to, at some point, maybe talk to my high school friends and again, see how they feel. That was an interesting group. We weren't the nicest people as a group. Today we talk about the bully and the bullied and the bystander. Um, that again, those ideas weren't really part of our language then, and my friends, yeah, they bordered on bullying, right? It could be quite nasty to some people. I've had conversations with former classmates since where they say things like, yeah, your friends were jerks, but I never really felt like you were part of that. And I guess so that makes me the bystander. I don't know if that's any better. I do remember often having feelings like this is not cool, right? I do not enjoy this, but because I wasn't nearly as confident then to speak up. The group was hard on each other as well. We like to pick each other apart. So, you stick your head up, then you're going to get the next attack. And I guess I just wasn't willing to take that at the time. I probably would today, I think, but who knows? Anyway, I better stop there. This is a little bit longer than normal. Oh, I'm almost at 20 minutes. Um, Thanks for listening. I hope you learned a little bit about me. Now it'll be interesting to explore how real these things are. And yes, I should point out I'm wearing my luckiest man, the Wood Brothers shirt. I do often feel when I remember to kind of be here now that I am the luckiest man. As not, and that doesn't, the problem I have when people talk about, oh, I have the greatest kids and I have the great whatever. Of course we all think that. Um, but we can all be the luckiest person, right? We don't, your life doesn't have to be like mine, but if we look at it in a certain way, we can appreciate the great luck that we've had. On that note, thanks for watching, subscribe, share, go to goodnoise.ca, join my mailing list. I don't know, whatever. I find this stuff kind of ridiculous, but yeah, I just want to talk about some stuff. Take care. We'll talk again soon.